Bonjour à tous, bienvenue dans Smart World with CNBC, votre rendez-vous de l'actualité économique internationale. Ravi de vous retrouver pour 30 minutes de décryptage. Au sommaire de cette émission, la course au vaccin. Gilead, Johnson & Johnson, après les annonces du président américain Donald Trump, convaincu de trouver un vaccin d'ici la fin de l'année. Les laboratoires pharmaceutiques continuent les essais cliniques avec plus ou moins de succès. Nous verrons ça en début d'émission. Retour également sur le débat jeudi soir entre les deux candidats à l'élection présidentielle. Y a-t-il véritablement un gagnant de ce face-à-face? Ont-ils convaincu ou non leurs électeurs? Réponse tout à l'heure avec les experts de CNBC. Et enfin, nous terminerons cette émission avec le succès fulgurant des big tech américaines. Apple, Facebook, Google enregistrent depuis le début de la pandémie des résultats records. Ces géants du numérique sont-ils inarrêtables? Analyse en fin d'émission. Smart World ou CNBC, c'est parti. La course au vaccin continue. Cette semaine, c'est l'antiviral remdesivir de Gilead qui reçoit le feu vert pour son traitement anti-Covid-19. La FDA, l'agence américaine du médicament, a accordé ce jeudi une autorisation permanente à l'antiviral pour le traitement des malades hospitalisés du Covid-19.
We are getting more breaking news on vaccine trial resumptions. This one's on J&J. Meg Terrell with the details. Meg.
Hi, Sarah. Well, the news coming fast this Friday afternoon. Now Johnson & Johnson is saying it has been given the green light by regulators to start resuming its COVID-19 vaccine trial. Now, remember, that one had just been paused very recently as they investigated an unexplained illness in the trial. Now, J&J saying that an independent data safety and monitoring board overseeing the study has recommended resuming the trial recruitment following consultation with the FDA. Those preparations to resume the trial are now underway, and they also have discussions with regulators around the world to resume that clinical trial program as well. Now, they note that no clear cause of this medical event in the trial has been identified. They say there are many possible factors that could have caused it, but based on the information they gathered, they found no evidence that the vaccine candidate caused the event. Now, no more information there about what the event was. The Washington Post reported just earlier this afternoon that they were investigating the case of a man in the trial who suffered a stroke and that this independent committee had concluded it wasn't related to the vaccine. The Washington Post citing two people familiar with the trial, J&J not giving those details. But guys, this of course follows the news we got just an hour or so ago that AstraZeneca is also restarting its clinical trial. So with this, all phase 3 vaccine trials for COVID-19 are a go again. Guys?
L'Europe a également autorisé temporairement le remdesivir depuis le printemps. 500 000 doses ont été commandées début octobre. Le laboratoire Johnson & Johnson, lui aussi, fait son retour dans la course. Leur essai clinique avait été interrompu il y a quelques jours après qu'un patient soit tombé malade. La phase 3 des essais cliniques devrait bientôt reprendre. Johnson & Johnson est en quelques semaines devenu le 10e groupe dans le monde à conduire des essais de phase 3 contre le Covid-19 et le 4e aux États-Unis.
Shares of Gilead are up about 4% this morning. The drug maker getting FDA approval for its coronavirus antiviral. Meg Terrell has that for us this morning. Meg.
Well, good morning, David. So the FDA fully approving Gilead's remdesivir. Remember, before it had just had emergency use authorization, and it had that since May. So this is the first drug for COVID-19 to actually get that official approval from the FDA. It's specifically for patients who are in the hospital, and it's based on trials, including one from the NIH, showing that remdesivir shortens recovery time. Now, you are seeing the stock up about 4% this morning. It had been up even more a little bit last night after the news. And, you know, folks pointing out that it's interesting timing for Gilead to get this approval because just last week we saw results from that World Health Organization Solidarity trial that really called into question the benefits of remdesivir. That trial pointing out that remdesivir appeared to have little or no effect on hospitalized COVID-19, as indicated by overall mortality, initiation of ventilation, and duration of hospital stay. And guys, for that reason, you are seeing people in the medical world questioning why the FDA gave approval right now. Dr. Eric Topol tweeting, for example, how can remdesivir get a full FDA approval when there are such mixed data? Not supportive of this decision at all, he says. Does it work early? Does it work late? Does it work anytime? So much unresolved. So those are the questions that are swirling today. But guys, still, Wall Street is modeling more than $1 billion in the second half of 2020 for sales of remdesivir. This from Piper Sandler. However, analysts not expecting that this is going to be a long-term growth driver for the company because, of course, we all hope COVID-19 is not with us for the long term.
Les États-Unis ont accordé 1,45 milliard de dollars de financement à Johnson & Johnson dans le cadre de l'opération de la présidence américaine pour produire des vaccins, l'opération Warp Speed. Économie maintenant et les discussions sur le stimulus plan aux États-Unis toujours en cours. Les négociations entre démocrates et républicains s'intensifient, mais les deux camps continuent de se renvoyer la balle sur ce retard. Donald Trump lui accuse les démocrates de proposer ce plan de relance pour des raisons politiques pour aider les États démocrates. C'est ce que nous dit la journaliste Ilan Mui sur CNBC.
Well, Kelly, the politics of another package are looking harder than ever. President Trump just speaking to reporters at the White House, accusing House Speaker Nancy Pelosi of not wanting to send aid to Americans before the election. And the Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin, indicated that the two sides still have a lot of ground to cover.
We've offered compromises. The Speaker on a number of issues is still dug in. If she wants to compromise, there will be a deal. But we've made lots of progress in lots of areas, but there's still some significant differences that we're working through.
Now, President Trump also reiterated the point that he made last night in the debates, which is that he doesn't want to bail out blue states. Now, we knew that state and local funding was one of the outstanding issues in this. Today, we're hearing both sides say that there is still a deal to be had if only the other side would just give in. And Kelly, I don't think that's going to happen in the next few days. Back over to you.
Yeah, somehow deals like that never happen. Yeah, if the other side just gives in, we're going to be fine. Yeah, if only. Elon, thank you very much. Elon.
Donald Trump accuse aussi les démocrates de faire preuve de mauvaise volonté. Nancy Pelosi doit poursuivre ses discussions avec Steve Mnuchin sur ce plan qui pourrait atteindre 2000 milliards de dollars. Les sénateurs républicains restent pour l'instant réticents à l'égard de ce projet qu'ils trouvent trop coûteux. Il n'y a pas que sur le stimulus plan que démocrates et républicains sont en désaccord. Jeudi dernier, encore lors du débat qui opposait Donald Trump et Joe Biden, les deux candidats ont montré deux points de vue diamétralement opposés sur les taxes et les impôts. Quelles sont les grosses différences entre les deux programmes? Réponse avec Jim Stewart sur CNBC.
Prize-winning columnist for the New York Times, Jim Stewart, joins us. And Jim, I love talking to you about taxes. Just in general, you've done so much work on it, and you and I can talk for ages about it, particularly when it comes to New York. But let's start with the president last night. I mean, how he can possibly say that he's not releasing his taxes because of an audit still? Give me your take on that. Is it really possible?
Well, no, that's not possible. First of all, the audit never would have stopped him from releasing the taxes if he wanted to. That has always been, utter nonsense. I can't imagine what it is except for the fact that he just doesn't want to release them. And given that the New York Times has now pretty much unveiled the largest part of what's in there, now going back for 2 decades, why not? I mean, the Times reported he only paid $750. He's claimed that it's through many legitimate tax breaks, which, by the way, is correct. I mean, the real estate industry has a cornucopia of tax benefits baked into the tax code going back to the first one. It only got better in the 2017 revision. So let's just put it out there. I don't see what more damage could possibly do, but he must have his reasons.
Yeah. Now, Jim, I'm sure you and I both know a lot of wealthy people in high tax states and cities that are trying to figure out what a Biden presidency would mean for their overall tax rate and whether they're going to have to actually leave if there is no elimination of that cap on the SALT deduction. What's your take on where things stand in terms of just tax rates between these two candidates?
Well, the tax proposals this time are, to me, they're so fascinating, and they've really been overshadowed by, bigger issues in the campaign, starting with the pandemic. Biden has put out a pretty detailed, comprehensive plan for, revising the tax code if he gets a majority in both the Senate and the House. Trump hasn't said very much beyond, of course, his 2017 reform. But I think on the Biden side of things, there are a couple of issues here. One is philosophical. He is proposing 2 major changes that many taxers have long advocated. One is to treat capital gains and ordinary income at the same rate, which harkens back to the Reagan reform of 1986. And the other, which I think hasn't got as much attention, but very important, He wants to eliminate the possibility of never paying capital gains taxes by either holding on until you die and giving it to your heirs tax-free, or in the case of real estate developers like Trump, flipping these properties when you sell them into other properties and then claiming this so-called like-kind exchange exemption, which he wants to get rid of. And then more specifically, he is talking about raising taxes on people who own $400,000, lowering them modestly for people who make less. The tax foundation analysis suggests overall that the tax increase is in the low single digits. It's not a massive increase generally, but it will hit those high-income taxpayers.
Donald Trump veut réduire l'impôt sur le revenu et offrir aux entreprises des crédits d'impôt pour les inciter à conserver des emplois aux États-Unis. Son rival démocrate souhaite, lui, augmenter les impôts des personnes à haut revenu, mais il affirme que cette augmentation ne touchera que les personnes qui gagnent plus de $400 000 par an. Économie toujours, comment les investisseurs vont-ils réagir à l'élection du futur président des États-Unis? C'est la question posée par nos partenaires de CNBC. On se rappelle qu'en 2016, l'élection de l'actuel président avait secoué les places boursières américaines dès le lendemain de l'annonce des résultats. Y a-t-il un risque de liquidation massive? Réponse dans l'émission Closing Bell sur CNBC.
Jim, do you think that we'll see the market sell off significantly if it is confirmed at some point in the next week that there won't be stimulus before the election, or just the hope that it will come at some point in the next few months? Is that enough?
You know, stimulus is going to happen, because if we don't make a decision on what's going to happen with forbearances, with evictions, with foreclosures, there's going to be some real pain in the marketplace. It could show up in some of these commercial mortgage-backed securities. It could show up in commercial real estate itself. It could show up with the banks. There could be some very, very serious pain if at some point we decide that we don't have a solution for these issues that are really out there. You just don't hear about them that much. The market has been, Michael's right, the market has been rallying on hopes of a stimulus selling off when you get that disappointment. It's the old Lucy and Charlie Brown in the football being pulled away all the time. But if you look at the volatility index, it's been cooling back off. And that does tell me that traders are not anticipating any major sell-off, either because of a stimulus disappointment or because of a possible hung jury on the election, which in my view is one of the real risks of the market and could create as much as a 10% sell-off if we don't know who won and we get another Bush-Gore type outcome where we're just waiting.
Jim, you mentioned the possibility of bankruptcies if we don't get stimulus. Do you think the banks have rallied too hard this week just on rates ticking up a bit, and if there isn't a stimulus that they'll suffer?
It's really interesting, the banking sector, and as you know, Wilfred, I haven't been real crazy about this sector just because I hadn't seen them moving yet. We're starting to see them move, and they broke out right at the same time, to your point, that the 10-year Treasury yield broke out above 80 basis points. And the real problem for the banks has been that the spreads have been too tight between the 2-year and the 10-year. Now they're starting to widen out. To your question, are they getting ahead of themselves? Well, if we don't get a stimulus deal and we don't decide what we're going to do with these things, then yes, there will be some pain back in that market, and in particular in those names. The other thing I thought was interesting, too, is that there's some bifurcation. You're not seeing breakouts on the major money center banks. What you're really seeing is the small cap financials. And there you can be a little more selective. There you can say, okay, how much exposure does this particular bank have? And you can start taking some ideas about who's good and who's not good if we don't get a deal. So it's a mixed bag. I'm not crazy about the sector yet, but I do think it's gotten more interesting.
Pour les experts de CNBC, c'est bel et bien le timing du stimulus qui sera décisif pour l'état des marchés américains. Comment les électeurs ont réagi au dernier face-à-face entre les deux candidats? Les derniers sondages donnent en effet vainqueur au niveau national le candidat démocrate, mais les deux ont réussi l'exercice de solidifier leur base électorale, selon les experts de CNBC.
Last night, like many events this political cycle, was sort of a Rorschach test, for voters of each party. It was a late night, early morning, so forgive me here. But I'm curious what stood out to you as potentially material to that middle ground.
So I think you're exactly right that it was a Rorschach test on the general level. If you came into the debate liking Trump, you left the debate liking Trump, and the same thing for Biden. But I do think you focus on one of the key issues. And the whole oil and gas debate, specifically the one on fracking, was very specific. There was a reason Donald Trump was going after Vice President Biden on that, because he's desperate to win Pennsylvania and Biden's desperate to hold it. And fracking is a huge issue there. So I think they went back and forth on that just to make sure that there were clear lines. And I think they both came out okay on that.
Did you think that there was anything else that moved the needle on, say, minimum wage, on regulation, or on potential stimulus that stood out to you?
So on the stimulus, it really depends on what position you're coming from. I mean, this is a pox on both houses, both the Democrats and the Republicans. We're in the middle of a full-blown election season. They've been trying to get it. We're very bearish on them getting it. And so as far as the COVID-19 relief, so I'm not sure if there's a victor there, but I do think each side solidified its bases and gave their own voters a reason to vote, which in my mind favors Vice President Biden because he's in the lead right now. I do think that Trump did stop the bleeding from the last debate, but we're going to see what's going to happen over the next few days.
Yeah, Andy, I mean, 47 million people as of yesterday, I think, have already voted, which is fairly extraordinary. Doesn't mean that we're going to have record turnout. We don't know. Maybe it's simply fewer people will turn up on Election Day. But, I mean, how could you – I just wonder, who's undecided at this point?
That's a great question. I don't think very many people are undecided. I think the key is turnout right now. It's turnout for those voting early and by mail-in ballot, and also turnout on what political operatives call Election Day operations. Who has the better ground game? Who is getting out their voters? And I'm just going to point to one thing. I know that all the polls point to Biden winning either narrowly or in a major way, but all President Trump has to do is hold all the states that he won in 2016 and win one of Wisconsin, Michigan, or Pennsylvania. And he is laser focused right now in Pennsylvania. And if I can talk really quickly about a demographic in Pennsylvania, non-college educated white men, 2.3 million, who did not vote in 2016 but are registered. And there are only 1.3 million of other voters from that time who didn't vote. And the Trump campaign has been very focused on that. So it's really about who gets their voters to turn out.
Ils ont tous les deux donné à leurs électeurs des raisons de voter pour eux. Donald Trump a réussi à se rattraper de son dernier débat, mais ça ne sera peut-être pas suffisant, conclut-il. Un vote pas comme les autres. Cette semaine, c'est depuis la Station spatiale internationale qu'a voté l'astronaute Kate Robbins. Elle fait aujourd'hui partie des 47 millions d'Américains à voter par anticipation à l'élection présidentielle américaine. Mais elle est la seule à le faire depuis l'espace. Retour sur ce moment insolite dans ce reportage de CNBC.
Voting in space is now a thing with no commuting and no lines. Check this out. NASA astronaut Kate Robbins creating her own voting booth and casting her ballot on board the International Space Station. NASA astronauts able to vote while they float. Thanks to a special law passed back in 1997, it requires astronauts to select elections in which they plan to vote 1 year ahead of their launch. Then an absentee ballot goes to an address marked low Earth orbit through the care of NASA. Finally, the astronaut gets the ballot, fills it out, and NASA returns it to the local election board. Space voting, new, and all the astronaut rage.
Dans un message vidéo enregistré avant son départ, elle juge essentiel de participer à la démocratie américaine. C'est important que tout le monde vote, poursuit-elle. Si nous y arrivons depuis l'espace, je pense que les gens pourront y arriver aussi d'en bas. La Barbie bat des records. Le PDG du groupe Mattel annonce un chiffre de croissance à 2 chiffres sur le 3e trimestre, alors que le groupe avait entamé l'été dernier avec d'importantes fermetures de magasins et des difficultés de distribution. On écoute Aidan Kritz au micro de Jim Cramer sur CNBC.
So I put up on Twitter that you were on, and I asked for questions, and I got an interesting one. It said, "How many Barbies does our nation need?"
Barbie is just doing an amazingly well. It's up 30%, almost in every segment. Demand for Barbie grew by 50%. It really speaks to the strength and ongoing momentum of the brand. This is all driven by great product, design-led innovation, active demand creation, and cultural relevance. According to NPD, Barbie was the #1 toy property in 12 out of 13 weeks in the US and was the #1 toy property overall globally in the third quarter, not just dolls, but overall in the entire industry. So we couldn't be more excited about Barbie.
Now, one of the things that you did say at one point in the conference call is that you actually literally are supply constrained. Is that something that you can fix in time for the holiday season?
Well, we're seeing tremendous demand for our product, more than we expected. With such surge in demand, we're now working hard to be able to fulfill it. It's just extraordinary, the growth in demand coming from a decline in the first half into such growth in the third quarter, heading into the holiday season. We're working very hard to be able to try and fulfill it.
Now, I was talking with Becky Quick this morning. We were doing our crosstalk, and her family plays Uno. And I said, well, I thought Uno went away. I mean, yeah, we played Uno 55 years ago. How come it didn't go away?
Uno is just another great brand that we own. Uno continued to perform exceptionally well. It actually was the #1 item in the entire games and puzzles category in the U.S. year to date and in the third quarter, according to NPD. The brand resonates across many levels, and we expect to see that continue to grow and have additional momentum heading into the holiday season.
Les ventes de Barbie, qui représentent plus d'un quart des recettes du groupe, ont bondi de 29%. Le chiffre d'affaires total du fabricant de jouets a progressé de 10% entre juillet et septembre 2020. Elles non plus ne connaissent pas la crise. Les big tech continuent leur envolée. Travail à distance, commerce en ligne, streaming vidéo, réseaux sociaux ou gestion des données. Les big tech américaines ont fourni des services indispensables à la poursuite de l'activité économique, plus que résilients. Google, Amazon, Facebook, tous affichent des croissances en hausse exponentielle depuis le début de la crise. L'envolée des big tech, c'est notre dossier du jour.
Welcome to Trading Nation. I'm Eric Chemi. A huge week of tech earnings, all while some of the group's biggest players face scrutiny from Congress. Alphabet, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, and a host of other big names gearing up to report their latest quarters. One top tech investor says a few of the upcoming reports are making him nervous. Let's bring in Paul Meeks. He's a portfolio manager at Independent Solutions Wealth Management. Paul, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, man. Always good to see you.
So, Paul, why are you so worried about earnings this week? Is it the company's performance, or is it something political, monopoly, Congress, regulatory, that kind of thing?
Boy, I'd like to say it's probably all of the above, but what we've seen in the early stages, and we're only in the early stages of this particular earnings quarterly season, is that some companies, if they are disappointing with either the actual results or with the go-forward guidance, are getting hit pretty hard. I'm not worried about all the names that I own in my tech fund, but there are some, particularly since they've had big moves and outperformance in their stock prices, that probably, if there's any tinge of disappointment, could have at least a short-term correction. If they do have a short-term correction and they're still on my tech favorites list, I'd probably buy into that weakness.
So if you're not feeling good about it, you want to buy on weakness, do you sell on strength, right? Is this just a one-sided trade? I buy on weakness, or is it I need to really lighten up, give myself some powder so that I can buy even more on weakness?
That's a great question. I actually want to hold most of my names except for the near-term nervous ones. And again, if they disappoint and I still like them long-term, which I do, then I buy into that weakness. Now, on the upside, I think that we may not be able to do it in the next 11 days before the presidential election. But if and when we do pass the follow-on stimulus package, then I feel much better about the economy, much better about the markets, and much better about tech. And at that point, I would actually advocate a risk-on equities trade, and your portfolio at that point probably should have a fairly large exposure to the tech sector.
Fairly large exposure to tech sector, even though they've run up so much. I'll ask, let me ask you that, and then I'm going to ask you about some specific stocks. So you say, have a fairly large exposure, but it feels like people do have a fairly large exposure to tech.
Oh, yeah, of course. I run a tech fund, so I'm tech fund all the time, right? I don't really have. But for somebody else who is underexposed in equities and underexposed within equities in the tech sector, which I think you should have, about 40% of your stocks in tech, it might be an opportunity to get in, because again, once we have the fiscal stimulus package, I am very bullish because the way I look at it is I know the temptation is to invest in some of these value stocks that have underperformed with the thesis that they'll come back to the norm. And the tech stocks that have outperformed will come back to some kind of normalized below price. But with real interest rates so low, and with growth so low, and with inflation so low, I hate to rain on somebody's parade, but I think that growth continues to outperform value. And I'm just waiting till we get through the election and the fiscal stimulus passage, and then I really want to emphasize that strategy.
Paul, I know you like Adobe. That's one of your favorite names. Can you explain to our audience why that name in particular stands out to you?
So Adobe is a company that's actually one of these 80s titans. It went public in 1986, but went through a metamorphosis under a new CEO a couple years ago. So all focused on software as a service. But here's a company that spearheads digital marketing campaigns. And of course, they were on fire with a very aggressive revenue growth before COVID. But COVID in the world I see after COVID will only emphasize that more. And unlike a lot of my tech stocks, which have priced in a lot of the upside greatness, I still think that out of all the tech majors, this is probably the one that still has ample upside to the price target, which I still think is either 10, 20, 30% higher than its current price.
So that's the one that you really like, the favorite, let's say your most favorite there. Is there any one in particular, though, the opposite, that you just think, I'm not touching this stock, I don't care what happens with the election, this is just a no-go for me in terms of any of these major tech plays?
Well, one of the things that I've seen recently, and I'm answering a lot of questions, like today, Intel is down 11%. A couple of days ago, IBM reported their quarterly results, similarly disappointing, down quite a bit. The same thing with Cisco, the same thing with Hewlett-Packard. So I'm one of the few tech investors, given my experience and unfortunately my age, that have been around when those companies were great, and they've been such dogs. And some of them have very attractive dividend yields, like, for example, HP and IBM have dividend yields of 6%. So the temptation is to get back in. I call it the revenge of the nerds thesis. But the problem is when you do that, you get into a company that is a yesteryear company that is not in sync with global technology trends, and it usually just ends up being a value trap. So today, a lot of folks have been asking me, hey, let's get into Intel down 11%. And I say, no way.
Interesting. Interesting. I like how you put it. I think we got to end it right there. Paul Meeks, always a pleasure to chat with you. Thanks for your insight today and joining us on the program.
See you, Eric.
That was Paul Meeks. Oh, yeah. There. See you later, Paul. That was Paul Meeks. Thank you for watching Trading Nation. I'm Eric Chemi. We'll see you next time.
La capitalisation boursière globale des GAFAM s'élève aujourd'hui à 6,687 milliards de dollars, soit environ 22% du S&P 500. C'est déjà la fin de votre émission. Merci à tous de nous avoir suivis. Très bonne journée à tous sur Bismart et à très vite dans Smart World with CNBC.